In 2001, director Wes Anderson gave the world a quirky dramedy about an eccentric family that struggles to communicate.
In 2021, we try a new expression of rye with the master herself.
The film is The Royal Tenenbaums.
The whiskey is Old Forester Rye Single Barrel.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 2001 Wes Anderson classic, The Royal Tenenbaums.
What'd you think, Dad?
Didn't seem believable to me. Why are you wearing pajamas? Do you live here?
He has permission to sleep over.
Well, did you at least think the characters were well developed?
What characters? There's a bunch of little kids there dressed up in the animal costumes.
Good night, everyone.
Well, sweetie, don't be mad at me. That's just one man's opinion. Happy birthday to you.
Brad, I have had this movie circled on the schedule for a number of reasons, not the least of which is this is our first Wes Anderson movie. And if I know anything about you, this is probably the first time you've ever watched a Wes Anderson movie.
I've never even heard of anybody with the name Wes or Anderson. So this is just like wild new territory.
Just introducing you to completely new things here.
I also like to think that your wall is just like a professor's wall at a college, and you just have like all these dry erase boards full of the schedule and just like big angry red circles around some and like X marks around the ones that I hated. And it's like a beautiful mind type situation.
Yeah, I like connect them with string like it's a conspiracy theory, trying to figure out what you like, what you don't like. Yeah, I'm never going to crack that code. But you pretty much have it nailed down here. That's exactly what it looks like around me right now.
Man, poor Carrie. I feel for her.
Well, Brad, we are not alone today talking about our first Wes Anderson movie. We actually brought back a huge Wes Anderson fan. If you all listen to the podcast, then you might remember a few months ago, we did a My Favorite Movie bonus episode with Jackie Zykan, the master taster at Old Forester. And Jackie was kind enough to come back and join us to go deep on this film today. Jackie, how are you doing?
I'm doing so good. I'm beaming. I'm so excited. Not just because you guys are amazing. Well, Brad, you're new, but you seem great so far. But because this movie is just, let's do this.
Yeah, I am brand new to this podcast. I'm really excited to.
Well, welcome in, Brad. Yeah.
You're new to me.
Jackie, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's great to be here with you today, Jackie. Thanks for letting me on.
I was going to say, Brad has a pretty tenuous grasp on this spot right now. So we'll see what he thinks of the movie, whether or not we actually continue to just let him talk, or if we're just going to boot him off and it'll be me and Jackie the rest of the time.
Oh, no, it would 100% be better for the podcast if Jackie was your co-host, Bob.
That's probably true, Brad. But let's see if you could redeem yourself. Last time we recorded something, now again, sometimes we release things in a different order than we record them. But the last time I sat down in a recording booth with you, Brad, we went into a deep dive on E.T. for our revisit episode to see if you would change your opinion on E.T. And
I did.
You did slightly. It got bumped up from a 6 out of 10 to a 6.5 out of 10. And, the last year has been really hard, and my hope for humanity in general has been waning. And Brad, you are doing very little to remedy that here. So
Film and Whiskey Nation, if you listen at the end of that episode, when I say that I gave it a 6, I bumped it up 1/2 a point, you can just hear the life go out of Bob.
Yeah, that's accurate. Well, so
I have to ask, what do you rate E.T. out of 10 as?
Oh, it's a 10 out of 10. It's a perfect film.
Though? No,
it's a perfect film, Jackie.
Besties. No, I'm not. Okay, this is. I have to be very careful how I.
Oh gosh,
Jackie,
you just really caught me in my most vulnerable place in my heart right now with E.T. I watched it when I was obviously young. I was born in 84. Like I was younger when I watched E.T. at my grandmother's house. We have this like big, massive family, extended family. And I remember we were all sitting around watching it. And that night I had a nightmare about E.T. and everybody, all of my cousins made fun of me for the next, like, I don't know, year or so. My oldest cousin went out and bought a stuffed ET doll, the like finger lit up, like it had like batteries in, like the finger like glowed, and she would chase me around the house and then locked me in the closet with it. And all I remember is seeing the glowing finger. And I am so traumatized from that like even in elementary school, our class, I remember, watched ET and I had to leave the room and I threw up because I was such a nervous wreck.
Oh.
I can't watch ET. I give ET a 0 out of 10, not based on the film, but based on childhood trauma alone. So I'm going to throw that out there without even being asked for it. There you go.
Jackie,
Glad you enjoy it.
the reason that happened is because E.T. looks like a gnomish burn victim.
Stop. Don't describe. Don't talk about it at all. We're not going to get into it. We're really not.
Well, then allow me to gracelessly segue us. I'll use a Brad G style segue here and say, speaking of childhood trauma, our movie for the day is The Royal Tenenbaums.
So,
Beautiful.
Thank you.
is kind of which honestly, it's kind of about childhood trauma.
I mean, it
and how
really
plays
is.
out as adults.
Absolutely.
So there you are.
So let's get into talking about The Royal Tenenbaums, a movie that is surprisingly near and dear to my heart because I just saw it for the first time maybe like 10 to 12 months ago, Brad. I'd seen a few Wes Anderson movies growing up and had been kind of iffy on him. Like the style over substance argument, I think, is one that is worth having because he has a very particular style and it doesn't click with everybody. And so I had avoided seeing Tenenbaums for a long, long time. I really, really like this movie. I think that it has that sort of emotional center that a lot of his movies are missing. I'm anxious to hear what you think, and that means that it is time for us to get into our favorite segment, America's favorite segment, Brad Explains. This is where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. That's obviously the case today. So, Brad, you have 60 seconds on the clock to break down for our listeners the plot of the movie The Royal Tenenbaums.
So, The Royal Tenenbaums is a movie about a family called the Tenenbaums, led by their patriarch, a man named Royal Tenenbaum. Yeah, everybody do a shot. So, it's about their family. They have 3 children who are geniuses, and they're really screwed up. And it starts with them in childhood and then moves into them about 22 years later as adults. And it works through how each of them have had many successes in life, followed by tragedy in various forms. You find out that the youngest brother is in love with the sister who was adopted. Their mom is going to marry this accountant of hers. And the dad tries to fake his way back into the family by pretending that he's dying because he's old and he realizes that he wants to be with his family.
10 seconds.
And that's pretty much it.
Oh.
Royal dies at the end. Spoiler alert.
Oh,
I got it.
you got him on the spoiler alert early. All right, so that is the plot of this movie, The Royal Tenenbaums. It really is, Brad. And here's the funny thing. You reached out to me, I'd say like midway through watching this movie. You sent me a text and said that your wife compared this movie to like a quirkier version of Knives Out. And I can kind of see that. Like it has that ensemble cast thing going for it. It has the deep, dark family secrets thing going for it. And the funny thing is, I wrote down that this is like a f***ed up version of Meet Me in St. Louis. And that's because we just finished watching Meet Me in St. Louis and talked the whole episode about how it's just the story of a family over the course of a year. And you watch their small victories, you watch their defeats, and they come out the other side better at the end of the film. And it was just really funny to see that exact kind of beat by beat plot going forward in this movie, just with a much more severely traumatized family at play.
I'm actually really curious, Jackie, have you ever heard of and or seen Meet Me in St. Louis?
Meet Me in St. Louis is my mother's hands down.
Hey.
I am originally from St. Louis. I could take you on a tour of St. Louis and show you the exact house that this was filmed in. I have seen it live, outdoor theater settings multiple times. I know all about the Meet Me in St. Louis situation.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
hopefully the comparison is at least a little bit apt then.
I mean, service level, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's interesting. It's a completely different time and place, right? Like Meet Me in St. Louis is real. It's way back. So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to compare and contrast them two, but I don't know. I'm going to have to watch it now tonight. And then it's probably going to dawn on me and I'll have to send you a note and be like, oh my gosh, you were so right. Oh my gosh. Like maybe deep down, I was just wired to like Royal Tenenbaums because I grew up being force fed Meet Me in St. Louis so much. And it's just like, now it's just a part of me.
Well,
no, Bob, Jackie's being nice to you.
Yeah.
There's zero connection between these two movies.
I'm just saying that the general outline of the fact that it's about a family over the course of a year overcoming obstacles, it was fresh in my mind.
Yeah, I mean,
And
Back to
listen,
the Future, about a family.
Yeah.
E.T., about a family. There's
I sense a
pretty
theme
much
here.
all the same movies.
I don't see any problem with what's going. I think I hit the nail on the head.
I'm pretty sure you're there, dude.
As we get into talking about this movie, I want to start with Wes Anderson as a director and as someone who is known for being incredibly meticulous with what he puts on screen, everything from the way the camera moves to the very obvious centering people and everything is symmetrical. And I think we catch him at a phase here with Tenenbaums. This is his third movie where like he's really starting to hone that specific visual style that we've come to know him for. But he hasn't gone overboard with it yet. And Jackie, I was just talking to Brad before we started recording. My wife actually told me I've always wanted to watch more of Wes Anderson's movies, but I've only seen a few of them. And so over the last month or so, we went back to his first film, Bottle Rocket, and worked our way through all of Wes Anderson's movies. And the first thing I need to say to you, Jackie, is I apologize to you because the Darjeeling Limited is maybe like his second best movie behind this one. And it was fantastic and amazing. And you were 100% right.
It's so freaking good. It's so good. That's so funny you bring that up. Like 3 nights ago, I was eating at this Indian restaurant in Louisville and I never realized they had sweet lime soda. And I was like, I'll have a sweet lime, please. And I giggled to myself and the person I was with was like, why are you laughing? And I was like, don't you ever watch the Darjeeling Limited? Like sweet lime. It's sweet. It's never mind. Like whatever. We're still in the minority, I think, Bob.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
We can, that's okay. So
Well, I brought all that up to say, like, I think that the movie that Wes Anderson makes immediately after this, The Life Aquatic, is his worst movie. I mean, that's my opinion, but that is the one where I think that he really goes for style over substance. And it is so much about the visuals and so much about the aesthetics that it was just a really, really boring movie to me. And I think what you have in Tenenbaums is this really great kind of marriage of Wes Anderson as a great screenwriter, bringing these kind of traumatic events and healing and family dynamics into things while also coupling that with his incredible visual style. But Brad, this was your first exposure to Wes Anderson. He's obviously a filmmaker that kind of calls attention to himself. Like you can look at any frame of a Wes Anderson movie and know that you're watching a Wes Anderson movie. So, I mean, what are your first impressions just kind of like visually of him as a filmmaker?
I think that you can tell that he has an artist's heart, that he just loves seeing specific types of colors that, I don't know, the way that he paints his scenes, all of the colors have a little bit of pop to them, and yet they're like soft and a little bit muted. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Like I can see so many different parts of the film where it's a bright color, but it doesn't overwhelm everything that's happening. And I think that that's something about his art style that I really, really enjoy.
That's one of the things you know when you see it, his color choices and his palettes, if you will, in that regard. But it is really hard to articulate exactly what it is. But I think you did a really good job with that. There's something, this sounds corny to say it, but there's something vintage-esque to all of his work, but it's not. It's still clean. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's very, very interesting.
You know, I was just listening to, it was actually a podcast, and it was talking about Wes Anderson's style. And they spent a long time talking about how he is influenced by so many different things, But what he actually puts on the screen, even though it kind of evokes vintage stuff or evokes certain periods, it's never actually accurate to the periods that he is trying to evoke. Like it is specifically of his own mind. And I think that's what's so interesting, because there's a ton of 1970s influence and there's a ton of 1950s influence. And it's this weird kind of like amalgamation of, I know exactly what I'm looking at is whatever's going on in Wes Anderson's mind. I don't know. He's kind of like a more refined Tim Burton in a way. There's just like there's a whimsy to it, but it's also like much more meticulous, much more planned out. You can tell that he really loves all the things that he's putting on screen.
Yeah, but you're right, though. It's incredibly meticulous. And that's one of the things that's so fascinating is once you start really peeling back the onion that is the Wes Anderson collection, and you start noticing these commonalities between all of his different films and the way that he designs his sets, and you really think about it, like the color of the exact pattern on those curtains in that, 2-second shot was very, very much like probably churned over forever.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is so purposeful. But the warmth aspect is so freaking spot on. But it's interesting that it really balances out. I think the primary Wes Andersons that I really resonate with, the Darjeeling Limited, the Royal Tenenbaums, the Grand Budapest, the things of that sort, there's always this sort of interesting balance of luxury, yet the warmth of everything really makes it tangible to a certain extent. It's very interesting. I don't know. I'm probably making zero sense. I just freaking love the guy. I love everything about it.
No, I think what you're saying makes perfect sense. And I think that the reason a director like Wes Anderson is so attractive to people and yet repulses so many other people is the meticulousness of his work. And I think for some people that draws them in and it makes them go frame by frame and pause it and go, man, I wonder why he chose to do this. And it's almost like an invitation into analysis and thinking about how all of this weaves together and what the color palette says about the characters and, why each character has such a distinct style and what is that trying to say about their interactions with each other. And yet for some people, they hear all of the things I just said and they go, yeah, that guy's just kind of artistic douche. Why does he care so much and why does he have to have so much control over it? And so I think that it really just draws some people in and pushes other people away.
Well, Brad, we've talked about this a lot on the show, this idea of the auteur theory that, directors are the author and everything is, a symbol of the director's intent, and every single thing you see on the screen points to a theme. We've gone through it with Scorsese and how all of his movies kind of share themes with each other. And I think Wes Anderson, and this is not in any way to like belittle him or anything like that, I think that he's a perfect example of a filmmaker that you can use to introduce somebody to the idea of a director as an auteur or as a director that has very specific choices and tendencies, because so often like we watch movies and we just ingest them and we're not thinking about the fact that, this took 60 days to film and in between takes, they were moving the camera for 2 hours. And you're not always aware of the fact that there's somebody behind the camera. And I think Wes Anderson is such a great person to introduce people to that concept with, because love him or hate him, you have a very clear sense and understanding that there are choices being made because you can see them being made with your eyes.
Yeah. Here's a question for you guys, though. So when we talk about actors, a lot of times we will, put down actors and actresses who are kind of like one note and they play like a similar character in everything that they do. And we praise the ones who have, depth and range and they can play lots of different types of characters and so on and so forth, right? Like that's a pretty common thing that people will do. I'm curious, why don't we apply the same thing to directors? Because in a certain sense, like Wes Anderson sticks with his one shtick from movie to movie, at the very least from what I have heard about him. And honestly, like I knew what his color palette would feel like, never having seen a Wes Anderson movie. Like I've seen enough of his movie posters and, stills from his movies that I'm like, oh yeah, he's going to have this style of art in it. So like, I don't know, is it a good thing for a director to, stay in their vein? Like I think about Christopher Nolan. all of his movies are known for the interlaying of like 2 or 3 different stories. And a lot of times there's a dead wife in there. And, there's all this stuff. Like, I don't know, is it good for directors to have their lane and stick to it? Or do you think it's more impressive when they're able to branch out and do a lot of different type films?
I mean, Brad, to your point, like it just depends on what your measures are for good and what your measures are for success on this, right? If the ultimate goal is to create the brand of Wes Anderson and to build off of that, then the consistency part of it is very, very key for brand messaging. But if the goal is to sort of just watch the constant weird friction space of somebody pushing themselves and challenging themselves and adapting and evolving into new scary territory for them creatively, then I think it's a completely different conversation, right? I personally like that there's a sort of comfort level that, it's going to be there. The part that sucks about that is when he falls short, and he has. And there have been some where it feels almost contrived in a way that he's tried to superimpose this aesthetic, but it just wasn't delivered as well as others. And then it's like, meh, it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think, Brad, I think every filmmaker does kind of find their lane, whether it's a visual lane, whether it's like the thematic kind of lane. And I hear what you're saying, because we should appreciate filmmakers who can work in like multiple genres. But even when you take a guy like Spielberg, I mean, he makes the same movie over and over throughout the 70s, 80s, early 90s. Like, we keep going in on this idea of the strained father-son relationship that he had in his life and how fathers and sons are constantly estranged in his movies. It's something that you continually see. You see it with Scorsese and his grappling with faith. And I don't know. I think it's a really good point to make, but I also do think that you've got to know your limitations as a movie maker. Like Hitchcock, he worked in a ton of different kind of subgenres, but he was always making suspenseful movies. And I think it would have been weird to see Hitchcock just come out with like a Western. It just, not that he couldn't do it, I just don't know if it necessarily interested him. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe like on paper, directors are more kind of one note than the actors they work with in terms of like what they select and what genres they work in. Yeah, something interesting to think about.
I can just see the movie poster from the 60s now, like Hitchcock and Wayne pair together for greatest suspense horror Western to be made.
Oh, gosh, that would be a terrible movie.
It would be so bad.
All right, so before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's talk about the actors in this movie, because I think this ensemble cast is incredible. This might be the best cast that Anderson has ever assembled, and Grand Budapest is up there just because of the sheer number of people. But I want to start at the kind of top here with Gene Hackman as Royal Tenenbaum. I mean, the movie shares his name, and he really is kind of the engine that makes everything go here in this movie. He's in almost every scene. Behind the scenes, Gene Hackman was really miffed that he had to be on set for like the entire shoot of the movie because all the other people were only there for like 3 weeks at a time, and he's like the connective tissue of the movie. But I really noticed on this watch through, I don't think this movie works at all without Gene Hackman in this performance, because he is so feisty, because he's so lively, and everyone else in the movie is just so morose or like, in a depressive state. And it has this sort of downbeat, like Eeyore kind of vibe to it. And without his shenanigans going on in the background, it really would be kind of a lifeless movie. And I really appreciated Hackman even more this time through, knowing that.
See, I'm in a weird spot with Gene Hackman in this movie. I love his performance. I'm with you on everything that you just said, Bob. But the weird thing for me is that, and once again, I am coming at this as a Wes Anderson novice, so you can take anything I say and throw it away. But I feel like every other character and actor, so like character is written and the person who played them in this movie feels like a Wes Anderson character. They feel like they belong in a Wes Anderson movie. Like even down to Pagoda, all of them fit the vibe that Wes Anderson goes for. And Gene Hackman just, I don't know if it's his character or the way he portrays him. It just doesn't feel like he fits in this movie. And maybe that's what makes it so great. But I don't know. Did either of you guys get that feeling?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, actually, Brad. Like he fits he's complimentary, but he doesn't necessarily fit in the Wes Anderson tone, if you will. He's too vibrant in it, but that's what the saving grace is of this, right? Like he lifts the entire cast up by being that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good word to use, that he's complementary to every other character, because at the end of the day, even though he's in almost every scene, the movie's not really about him. And I don't know how else to make that make sense, but you know, he obviously like atones for all of the sins that he commits against the family. But this is really more of a story of the kids coming to grips with, you know, their place in life and getting over their kind of depressive states and figuring out how to make bad situations better. And so I don't know that even though Gene Hackman is, quote unquote, the star of the movie, I don't know that I'd say the movie's about him.
I know what you mean. It's not necessarily about him, but he really is the common denominator of all of the issues that they're struggling to cope with and grow through in this entire movie. So in a way, it is completely about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's why, like, I was thinking about putting Gene Hackman as the star for this movie, but in the end, I was like, no, it's just director Wes Anderson and a bunch of awesome characters and actors. So it's hard to choose if he is the star or if he's just the complimentary role that makes the entire engine run. I totally agree with you guys.
You guys are the film folks. I am not a film folk. I'm a whiskey folk. So I have to ask you, in other films where there are these sort of cast builds, where it's this, as you call it, the ensemble cast, where you've got a massive amount of big names playing, is the point of that to diffuse away from having a main character so that, you know, everyone is so quote unquote important, if you will, or so well known that it just kind of all cancels each other out?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I think what at least my interpretation is, like, I think Wes Anderson is trying to give all these characters kind of an equal weight in terms of the story he's trying to tell. And obviously some are more minor than others, but having this many movie stars in the movie, I think really does like kind of ensure that you're not wandering too far away from what's happening on screen. Like when it's Gwyneth Paltrow and Luke Wilson, you're concerned about their characters because, you know, especially in 2001, they're very big name actors. So you're not constantly wondering, like, when's Gene Hackman going to come back on screen? Where's Ben Stiller? And at least for me, I really, really appreciated that because it did, like, I think it worked to keep me engaged in each character's story more than it would have if he had had, like, Gene Hackman and a bunch of no-name people.
I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, but, you know, while we're talking about Luke Wilson and Gwyneth Paltrow, incest? Question mark? What's that doing in the script, Bob?
That's a great question, man. I don't know that I have the answer for you. I guess technically, legally, not incest, but as Gene Hackman says, still frowned upon.
Yep.
Very much so.
I'm okay with that frown.
So, okay, let's use that as our awkward segue into talking about the kids then. You've got Ben Stiller, you have Luke Wilson, and you have Gwyneth Paltrow, and then as the kid across the street, Eli Cash, you have Owen Wilson. I think everybody uniformly is excellent in this movie. Gwyneth Paltrow's character became a pretty big, I don't want to call her like a meme, but like I've seen tons of people try to mimic her performance, her look in this movie. It's a very specific thing that, that this movie kind of launched, I think. But the one who always stands out to me is Luke Wilson as Richie. In a lot of ways, this kind of is his movie. And like he has a huge character arc. You know, he goes through that suicidal stage and comes out the other side, understanding like this weird love I have for my adopted sister is just something that we're going to have to deal with for the rest of our lives. I think both of those characters play that really beautifully. Then you've got Ben Stiller, who is grappling with his wife's death, who hasn't come to terms with it yet, who has, I think, the best line in the whole movie, which is right there at the end when he finally breaks down and just says, "I've had a rough year, Dad." It gets me every time. I don't know, Brad, Jackie, who stands out among that kind of, group of kids from the cast for you?
So I don't know if it's like a thing I have with Ben Stiller, like a personal, it's not a vendetta. That's the wrong word. But it's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know. He's great, but there's something about him where I'm like, I don't want to hang out with you. Like it's kind of that kind of thing. And his character in this movie, it really exacerbates that for me because he's so anxious and he's so paranoid and he's just so in a constant state of fear. But I don't think that's necessary. Like, I feel like there were underpinnings of that when he was a child as well, because he was, just this I don't know. They were all pressured into be these overly motivated, quote unquote, child geniuses. And like, it's just, there's an energy with him that's just like a constant vibrating energy that just I get off put by.
He just kind of feels like the worst.
Yes, exactly. Even though like deep down, he's just sad, and he's got stuff he needs to work on and like whatever. But no, he bothers me in this one. No, I'm sure he's a great guy. He's probably amazing.
Yeah, I mean, he listens to our podcast regularly, so if he stops drinking Old Forester, I wouldn't blame him, No,
not that.
No, Jackie, I understand where you're coming from. He, from the very start, like you said, I think the important thing is that even as a child, he just has this off-putting aura to him that doesn't really leave as an adult. And my struggle with Ben Stiller is that he is such a specific actor, and I just don't know if I pictured him in this role. Like, whereas Gene Hackman felt kind of odd in this movie, but I loved his performance. I thought it held everything together. I think Ben Stiller felt odd in this movie, and I didn't care for his performance. So he is not my favorite. I actually really loved Gwyneth Paltrow in this. I think between her and Luke Wilson, I would have a hard time picking which one I liked more. But I think that the way that Gwyneth portrayed that secretiveness and that angstiness that often comes with being adopted, and I can imagine would come, especially if you were reminded that you were adopted your whole life. I don't know. It struck a tone with me. It resonated with me that I thought she did a phenomenal job.
Oh, absolutely agree with that. She is stuck under this weird threshold of just constant darkness and depression that will never go away. She was great. And, I'm a huge Bill Murray fan. And I really liked him, even in the small amounts that he was in this. He's always got that sort of like dopey sarcasm thing going on. And he's just kind of got that like staring blankly at you like you're a moron. And I love that. But with this, he almost seems that he's got, there's more wheels turning in his mind. He's very intellectual in this one. And I don't know. He could do anything. I love Bill Murray.
Totally agree. And like, I think it's so funny that he's kind of in this movie in such a small role too. And in such a non-Bill Murray part. And he plays it so well. And that's kind of the thing. Like, even as, the mom, Etheline, you've got Angelica Houston. As her suitor, you've got Danny Glover. Top to bottom, this cast is just fantastic. Brad, I mean, who else stood out to you? If there's one other person that you want to talk about before we go to break, was there another performance that really kind of meant a lot to you?
Bob, I freaking loved Kumar Palana as I guess I'll call him a butler. Would that be a good term?
Yeah.
I don't even know what you'd call him. Doer of deeds?
Yeah, he just kind of takes cares of things, specifically for Royal, but for the family in general. And I loved Pagoda. I think that there are certain parts of this movie that just make zero sense, even within the world of the movie. And Pagoda is in a lot of those scenes, and I think that his performance makes them work.
He has the cancer.
No, he doesn't. I know what stomach cancer looks like. I've seen it. And you don't eat 3 cheeseburgers a day with French fries if you got it. The pain is excruciating.
How would you know?
My wife had it. Not only is there no Dr. McClure at Kobe General, there is no Kobe General. It closed in 1974.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
Because, like, a lot of it, I'm just like, I don't know what's happening right now, but apparently he was a hired assassin and tried to kill Royal in Calcutta way back in the day, and then he stabs him with a freaking pocket knife. Bob, I don't know what's going on with his character, but the loyalty and the way that he is honest with Royal, I love. It's a perfect counterpoint to who Royal is.
Yeah, but there is a lot of sort of mystery around that, right? I mean, the backstory of how they first came across each other, why does he then carry him to get help for the wound he just put upon him? Was it because like he was supposed to be turned in alive? Like you never get any clarity around that.
Yeah.
And there's a loyalty there, but like, so Royal obviously is asked to leave the house. He and Ethely never get divorced, but he's asked to leave. Pagoda stays at the house, servicing the family, if you will, but still remains loyal to Royal. Don't mean to rhyme it, but it happened.
Hey.
But like, who's paying Pagoda for his services, though? You know what I mean? Like, what's happening there? Who's writing the check?
I mean, it's basically like what we think about Brad on this podcast. Like, what is he still doing here? How long are we going to let him hang around?
Yeah.
You know,
who's paying me?
Why did he stab me in the gut with a shiv? Like, there's just so many unanswered questions. All right. So before we go to break, Jackie, we are so honored and privileged to have you here today to talk about this new product. I'm so happy that you guys had a new product to kind of plug on the show because that means that we get to try it. Old Forester Single Barrel Rye. This is a new expression that just launched. It's a little bit different in how you guys are rolling it out than the Single Barrel Bourbon. What can you tell us about this product, just from like the inception of it to the way that you guys are choosing to roll it out?
Yeah, so this was one that we kind of tinkered around the idea of this for a while. You know, we knew when we laid down all these rye barrels that we had an expression in mind. That was the 100 proof sort of everyday core rye expression. But we always like to kind of reserve some inventory for special projects or, you know, why couldn't there be a birthday rye or I don't know, whatever, fill in the blank how you will. So we had some extra inventory, but the 100 proof rye did so well that we had to really like chip away at our reserves quite a bit to keep it going. And by like do well, like it's sold like 3 times as much. We had no idea. We did not anticipate that at all. And so what we ended up with was these rye barrels still left. And they were designated based obviously on being defect free and of the highest quality and most balanced flavor profile. Mm-hmm. But really, when we saw the success of the barrel strength single barrel, and we started seeing the trends in this category shift towards higher proof and something that's a little bit more raw in the bottle, it was just sort of like, why not? We had all tasted it at barrel strength and we're like, this is amazing. Everyone who had ever tasted it. We used to like bring a barrel to the distillery for different events and let people just thief some out just because you could never get a barrel strength rye from us. And every single person just adored it. So we're like, well, why wouldn't we? You know, yeah. That's kind of like, that's what allows Old Forester to sustain 151 years is that we actually listen to what people want from us. And then we try to respond and give the people what they need, you know? So this kind of came out of that.
Well, one of the things going along with that, that I read, especially about the way you guys are releasing the product, is that you're not doing private barrel selections with the high proof rye. Is that still the case?
Yes, this is an everyday thing. I guess a special everyday thing. Not much of it. There's only 75 barrels for the entire US for the entire year. And so, for example, we will do that many single barrels of bourbon for private selections in a month. And we still have a massive wait list of people that are just chomping at the bit to get some. So it would kind of be a rude move for us to be like, well, we've got 75 barrels, you know, you guys fight for who gets it. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to put that out there at all. So it just made sense. We could cover more ground and get it into more areas if we did it this way, where we could break it up case by case and not just whole barrels at a time.
Jackie, you have no idea the music to my ears, the things that you just said are. I'm not going to say anything about other companies right now, but if you are a fan of the Film and Whiskey podcast, you know the angst and anger that's burning in my soul right now. So thank you, Jackie. Old Forester is like top notch in my book.
Well, thank you very, very much. I mean, obviously we try to please the people, but it's interesting. Like I said, every single expression we have has really like come to exist out of this is what somebody wanted, or this is what a group of people wanted. This is what the category was. So we're not out by any means as a brand to create false scarcity or make something seem more valuable by making less of it. I assure you, we just were unprepared for the success of what the Old Forester rye was going to be. And unfortunately, in a business where you age your spirits, you have to be patient to catch up and, catch up your inventory on that kind of stuff. But this was never intended to be like, why don't we just do a little bit and then we can charge more and people will fight over it and then they'll resell it and it'll be worth even more. Like that is never a conversation we have. We're like, oh crap, we're running out and everyone's going to be pissed. What do we do? Like that's more of the conversation that takes place.
Well, I can tell you definitively that I am not pissed about trying this whiskey. Brad and I are actually going to record our whiskey review of this single barrel rye after we wrap up with Jackie here today. So, Brad, I'm really, really pumped to try this. Let's go ahead and throw to that review now. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are checking out Old Forester Single Barrel Rye. As Jackie said, this is a new expression from Old Forester. It's different than their single barrel bourbon in that they're actually letting consumers get to it, which I love. Brad, I appreciate that you didn't want to share any brand names, but everyone knows who we're talking about.
Everybody in Film and Whiskey Nation knows what we're talking about, so you're not going to suck me back in, Bob. You won't do it.
Oh, I will, though. So let's jump right into tasting this. This is 124 proof. It's at least 5.5 years old out of the barrel. Brad, on the nose, I immediately upon pouring it, I gave it a sniff and just a really beautiful bouquet. Really, really floral. Not super rye forward. That was what really struck me here, was that the rye didn't really jump out of the glass. The first things that met my nose after that floral note were a lot of peach and a lot of lemon zest. Like it was just really strong lemony scent to this, almost like when you get a donut that has like lemon inside of it. What's that called? Like
lemon custard.
Custard inside of it. That's like, That was a really dominant note that I got on the nose here. The rye does finally come back into things a bit later. Again, that floral note was present throughout. It had a lot of kind of like a rose scent to it. And then the very last thing I got on this, Brad, was almost a bit of a champagne-y kind of character. It had a really bright, almost grape note to it. Lots of honey, lots of sweetness. This was a super complex nose. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10.
It smelled like the land of Champagne, France. That is incredible.
Very much so.
It smelled like the dirt itself.
It wasn't sparkling wine. It was specifically champagne.
The dirt of Champagne. Yeah, Bob, for me, this is a beautifully creamy aroma. For me, it had a lot of like cherry to it, like a dark cherry. Like you said, there wasn't a ton of spiciness to it. I got a little bit of almost like a bit of a bitter, dark chocolatey nose to it that I really liked.
Oh, interesting.
It's a complex, fascinating nose that I am just in love with. I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, that's what I gave it as well. And that takes me into the taste. Now, again, it is super complex, but some of the notes that I got in the taste were not present at all on the nose. This was very alcohol forward, and it like attacked my tongue without mercy. There was just a ton of prickly tingling going on here. It took a while for the alcohol to calm down on my palate, to be honest with you. It took me 2 or 3 sips to really get acclimated to this. But the dominant note that I got, maybe not the dominant one, but the first note that I got, Brad, watermelon Jolly Rancher. Like there was a very specific candy note. It took me a minute and I was like, oh, it's Jolly Ranchers. It's watermelon. This was a little bit thinner than I expected it to be on the mouthfeel. Like it wasn't very viscous at all. Very, very hot. When you go to swallow, though, really pleasant. Lots of vanilla, lots of oak. It had a nice fruity character. Again, some of that kind of citrus. I actually got more of a grapefruit on the flavor than I did on the nose. But again, I'm picking up a ton here. It's not a one-note kind of rye. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
I feel like One Note Rye would be a great country band name. But Bob, this is fruity. It is bold. It's got a little bit of nice caramel to it. There's some of a dried cherry type of feel. For me, there's a little bit almost of like a fresh coffee bean going on in my mouth that I really like. I am loving this taste. The palate that it's offering me is phenomenal. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 on the taste.
Now, Brad, where I think this one suffers is on the finish. And finish for us is not just necessarily like how long is the flavor left in your mouth, right? Because that's a big portion of it. But it's also for us like, does it have that quote unquote Kentucky hug? Do you feel it going down? Does it continue on after you swallow it? And for me, that portion of the finish is kind of non-existent. Like the flavor definitely leaves behind a nice taste in your mouth. You get to develop some of that oaky flavor as well, but there was no chest burn. And again, my tongue was like on fire from drinking this. So I was really expecting a nice hug on the way down, but it was as if like the whole experience took place on my tongue and then the rest of my body forgot that I was drinking anything. And that was kind of a huge bummer. So for me, this is actually a huge step down from the nose and the taste. I'm actually only going to give it a 5.5 on finish.
Ooh, Bob, I can't disagree with you more. I think the finish is where this whiskey really shines. For me, I didn't get any of that burning destruction of the mind on my tongue. So for me, it was a fantastic finish of spices, oak. I thought it was a decently long-lasting finish that like really left me thirsty for more.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the flavor was definitely there. I just wanted a little bit more of a hug on the way down. So what did you give it on the finish, Brad?
8.5.
8.5. Wow. Yeah, we're a whole 3 points different on that. And that takes us into our balance category. I think this is fairly well balanced, but because of that finish, it's not exceptionally well balanced, which I think it would have been if it had continued on the path that it was going with the nose and the taste. I'm still going to give it a 7.5 out of 10 on balance. I think that the nose and taste are like out of this world, but there was a bit of a drop off for me on that finish.
Yeah, and for me, with it just really hitting home run all the way through, I'm actually going to give it a 9.5 out of 10 on balance. I think this is incredibly complex, but honestly, similarly to the Royal Tenenbaums, it takes all of these different kind of flavor threads and winds them all together in an incredibly satisfying way. So I'm a big fan of this one, Bob.
Now, Brad, listeners of our podcast know that we don't just give tasting notes, we give our opinion on the value as well. And that's our final category here. Old Forester Single Barrel Rye has an MSRP of $80. So it's coming out of the gate with a pretty high suggested retail price. We all know that Old Forester, it runs the gamut in terms of having very affordable, very available bottles and then having highly allocated, hard to find bottles. Because of the supply of this, because they only have 75 barrels a year of this coming out, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know if it's just going to be released and then fly off the shelves or if they're going to allocate it, if the secondary prices are going to go way, way up. We can only really comment on suggested retail price. Listen, I think for a single barrel that was hand-selected, that is one of only 75, that is at least 5.5 years old, that's being released at barrel proof, this is actually a pretty solid value. But I think kind of our baseline is, in most cases, $80 would be a lot to spend on a bottle of whiskey when there are so many other affordable alternatives. I'm still pretty positive on the value, Brad, but I think I'm only going to give it a 6.5 on value.
I'm in a similar spot to you. I think that with how much I really love this whiskey, I'm going to come out to a 7.5. I still think it's a really great value. I would recommend you buy a bottle. I'm coming to a 42 out of 50, Bob. This is upper echelon for me.
Yeah, I'm coming to a 36 out of 50. So we're at a 78 out of 100, or an average of a 39. We're just below that 40 mark where it's like a no-brainer recommendation. But for me, I actually think this is a no-brainer recommendation. If you find a bottle on the shelf, which will likely be very hard to do, I'd say don't hesitate, pick up a bottle. It is absolutely worth the price. Yeah, this is one of the highest rated ones we've had this season, Brad. Where do you think this kind of stacks up with some of the other high proof or single barrel ryes that we've had?
If we're limiting it just to ryes, I would say this is probably one of the best.
Yeah.
I'm trying. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about him. Yes, this is the best one we've had.
There you go. Again, Old Forester, I just feel like in general, they are known for having a very, very spicy palate. And if that's your thing, then this is right up your alley. Again, not super rye grain forward, but it definitely brings the heat. I'm a big fan of this. We both heartily recommend. Brad, what do you say we jump back in with Jackie Zykan and finish talking about the Royal Tenenbaums?
Let's get to it.
All right, so that was Old Forester Single Barrel Rye. We're getting back into talking about the Royal Tenenbaums now. And Brad, I want to talk about some of the key scenes here. I want to talk about the quotes in this movie. This is a super quotable movie. I don't know, like, it's your first time watching it. I'm sure there were moments that made you at least chuckle. Was there any, in particular, any lines that just made you, like, absolutely lose it in this movie?
Anybody interested in grabbing a couple burgers and heading to the cemetery?
I just, in general, I love how flippant he is about the cemetery. Like when they're first talking about, Ben Stiller's like, hey, my wife is buried there too. And he's like, oh yeah, we can swing by her grave on the way out.
Yes, exactly.
It's great.
Like, what was it? The whole Margot not ever being invited to go to the cemetery because it wasn't technically a blood relative of hers, right? And he's
Right.
like, I just figured he didn't really care to go. Like, it didn't interest you, whatever. And here she is, like, as an adult with all these deep-rooted issues that she's been sitting on because of never being included in shit like this. Like, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great quotes in this movie. One of my favorite ones is when they're going over Gwyneth Paltrow's like life, and it's her file that the private detective found, and it shows all these dudes that she has slept with. And at the end of it, he just goes,
She smokes. Yes.
like that's the thing that like threw him for a loop out of all of this infidelity and wild life that she's lived. He's just like, holy crap, she smokes cigarettes.
I think for me, the two that really stand out are when he's first talking to Ari and Uzi, his grandsons, and he just says, I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a terribly attractive woman. The kid's just like, thank you. And then at the very end of the movie, where Chaz has thrown his friend Eli over the wall and they're both laying over on the other side of the wall, and Danny Glover and Gene Hackman are running next door, and he just says, like, I just don't want you to think I'm an asshole. And Danny Glover goes, I don't think you're an asshole, Royal. I just think you're kind of a son of a bitch. And Gene Hackman, like, it's the perfect delivery. He's like, well, I really appreciate that. It's just the way it lands. It is the perfect delivery of that line.
Yeah, I think for me, another line that just got me when after Richie has attempted suicide, they ask him about like a suicide note, and Chas asks him, well, is it dark? And Richie goes, of course it's dark. It's a suicide note. I don't know why that got me, but I lost it at that line.
Well, I think I've already tipped my hand here a little bit, but I think the most important line in the movie, at least for me, is when Chaz tells his dad, it's been a rough year. And, to throw back to my absolutely horrible comparison to Meet Me in St. Louis in the first half of the episode, it really is the story of this family over the course of the year just getting over some stuff that has been traumatic for them their whole lives and finally learning to forgive each other and to say the things that have been unsaid for so long. And this movie really, I wasn't expecting it to creep up on me and affect me emotionally as much as it did, because it does remain kind of whimsical and silly through most of the movie. And then you get this like really huge curveball of Richie trying to kill himself. It gets dramatic for a while. It gets lighter again. And then the ending where, you see Etheline and Danny Glover's character get married, and you see Royal finally like make amends with Chaz, and then he dies. And I got really choked up at the end of this movie. And I guess I just want to know, like, for you two, especially for Brad, who's just seeing it for the first time, did the emotional part of this movie work for you? Like, do you think it was too little too late, or was it really a good payoff to what had been set up leading up to that?
So you know me, and you know why I like crave these movies so much. And it's more of an aesthetic situation than it is a content. I've seen this movie probably hundreds of times. I have just put this movie, I could literally just watch this movie with like, and not pay attention to any of the dialogue. I'm just there to watch, not to hear, not to think, not to do any of that. But now after we had our last podcast together, anytime that I've seen it or any other Wes Anderson movie, I'm like, oh, I better pay attention or I'm going to sound like a moron because I'm not going to know what I'm talking about. And I actually rewatched this yesterday, and there was something that I noticed that made it, I hate that I'm saying this because I'm the biggest Wes Anderson fan, but there was something that made it feel so forced and I hated it. And in that moment, I was like, I'm going to have to take a break from this one for a while. Do you remember the end where the beagle gets, spoiler alert, the beagle dies?
Worst part of the movie.
Right. But then Royal gets a dog for the boys, and it's a Dalmatian off the fire truck that was there because of the car accident and all the other stuff. And I don't know why, for the first time ever in literally my adult life, it registered with me that he gets a Dalmatian. He raised all these Dalmatian mice, and there was something just too consistent about that made me just go, oh, well, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It feels weird, and I don't like it. This is so pointless to even bring up, but
it's not.
And it bothers me now.
No, I totally get it because I've now watched this movie, having never seen it before. I've watched it 3 times in the last, 10 months because I just watched it on a whim. My wife wanted to watch all the Wes Anderson movies, and then I watched it today again for the podcast. And I will say, by the 3rd time around, the impact of the movie definitely is kind of lessened. So I do, you start to notice that things are kind of contrived. You start to notice things are kind of forced. But I think like with movies we love, we're also much more prone to find things to nitpick in them too. And that's why I'm so interested to hear what Brad has to say. How did the movie affect you emotionally? Did it work for you? Where are you landing on this, having only seen it one time now?
I think for me, The Royal Tenenbaums, it's a film that has tons of fluff and a few core threads that like you keep kind of like pulling your way through the movie with. And some of those core threads pay off for me and some of them don't. As you can imagine, the whole love story between Gwyneth Paltrow and Luke Wilson doesn't work for me. The whole character of Eli Cash doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
What?
I can't stand Owen Wilson in this movie. We didn't talk about him specifically. I don't understand why his character's there. I like story reasons. Yes, I get why he's there, but overall, I just don't like him being in this movie as a character. So like certain parts of this film just feel like they don't make any sense to me. But overall, the movie is just fun. It's weirdly lighthearted. It doesn't feel like it should be. But by the end of the film, you have specifically Ben Stiller kind of with that one line that I think he delivers beautifully about it being a really hard year. And honestly, after a year like 2020, I think a lot of people could probably relate to him with that line. I think that the way you see Etheline's story wrap up with Danny Glover is beautiful. Overall, I think that this is it's a fascinating movie because he's trying to juggle a lot of different storylines at the same time. He's trying to keep a consistent art direction through it all. He's trying to do so much, and I would say for the most part, he pulls it off to the point where he has a Dalmatian dog and there's all the Dalmatian mice. Like it's just wild the stuff that he does in this movie. I was really impressed. I enjoyed it. I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Brad, I think that's a really good starting point. Honestly, like I didn't know what you would think of Wes Anderson. The few kind of quirkier movies that we've done on this show, you've not been fans of. So
name one movie I haven't been a fan of, Bob. I love all the movies.
Sure. Like, Eternal Sunshine wasn't a 2 out of 10 for you, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, it was great, man. Like 8.5, solid.
Right. So I am really surprised and pleasantly surprised to hear that. I'm with Jackie. Like, by the third time watching this movie through, I have not seen it hundreds of times like her. You do start to notice certain things. And I think that even having just watched all his movies in the last month or so, I think I might personally prefer Moonrise Kingdom to this movie. They're very close in my mind. But this is right up there. And I think it's a really good place to start when you're getting introduced to Wes Anderson. Brad, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how it's been a really rough year, literally, for all of us. And it's pretty rare that I watch a movie and instead of asking myself just how is this affecting me or how does this speak to me, I ask myself, how does this speak in this day and age? This movie's 20 years old now. I think it might be more relevant now than it was 20 years ago, as people have normalized kind of talking about these traumatic things in their childhood and working through some of these things that weren't as talked about in 2001 as they are now, coming out of the year that we have all come out of, and just kind of having that reaffirmation that, yeah, just like the Tenenbaum family, we're all kind of messed up. We all have our own baggage, but it's going to be okay. And I think that kind of warm-hearted feeling I get at the end of this movie is what keeps me coming back to it. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Yes.
I will actually say, at the very least, this has me interested in watching more Wes Anderson.
It's a very positive sign, man.
Yeah.
That means we're going to have to bring Jackie back at least one more time then.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. And we're going to have to do the Darjeeling Limited next time and really... Yeah. I'm interested in the fact that you put Moonrise Kingdom up so high. And I say that as a huge Wes Anderson fan. It wasn't my favorite. It wasn't. I'm with you on The Life Aquatic as well. There's some corniness to that, especially with like the weird, like fish. They're not like cartoon, but you know what I mean? Like they don't belong there.
Like stop motion. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you with the 9 out of 10 as well on this. And I think that this is, if you were only going to watch one Wes Anderson movie that actually had good substance to it and got a good idea of what his design mind is, I think this is a great one to do.
Well, it seems like we're all coming out in a pretty solid place on this. If you average out Brad's score and my score, we're at an 8.5 out of 10. But we want to know what you think. So please get on social media. You can find us at Film Whiskey on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Or you can leave us a voicemail. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. You can reach us on our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we start the third season of our walkthrough of the Harry Potter movies. We've done 2 movies apiece for the last 3 seasons, so we're getting into Harry Potter number 5, The Order of the Phoenix, and Harry Potter number 6, The Half-Blood Prince, back to back. Brad, I'm excited to revisit that world. It is a very, very different world than the one of Wes Anderson. So as usual, we're taking some hard left turns out of the familiar territory we've been in. But I cannot wait to get into that. Once again, I want to say thank you to Old Forester Master Taster Jackie Zykan for joining us on this episode. Jackie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and for honestly inspiring me to watch this movie yet again for the 900th and enjoy all of the beautiful Scalabandre zebra wallpaper there is to be found throughout this film. So.
Yeah, Jackie, go ahead and plug anything from Old Forester. What have you guys got coming up? What's going on with you guys?
Well, we always have something exciting coming out. And, we're finally getting kind of back to normal at the home place. So if anyone out there is ever interested in either you live in Louisville or you want to take a quick little road trip, come and see us because we are here to welcome you, to share all things Old Forester with you. If you want to keep up on stuff we do, at Old Forester is your go-to there. And yeah.
Well, Brad and I can't wait till we can get back down to Kentucky again. We need to pay Old Forester a visit, if nothing else than to just say thank you to Jackie for the fantastic whiskey they continue to make. We're excited to get into Harry Potter next week, and we'll see you next Monday for that one. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.